Is that?
No, that doesn't make sense.
That don't make sense. And I got to ask him a question. I said, what are the questions you have? When he came over, I got to ask him, what are the questions? He said, what are one of the reasons? But I think maybe Painter kind of twisted it like that. Anyway, I was kind of disappointed. I read
It looks like it's about 2 minutes after 6. So that means I'm 2 minutes late getting started. I apologize for that. Hi. You want to speak right into the tie?
Very late. Ladies and gentlemen, my Chief of Staff, Randy Swanson.
Thank you very much.
We can just go on. Good evening. Thanks for coming. Here's my thought on this evening, and I'm going to try to speak for about 15 minutes or so. Get you caught up. Oh, thanks. Get you caught up on a couple of things of what has been going on in Washington. There's been quite a bit. I don't know what all your questions are, and so I'm going to try to speak about 15 minutes or so. Get you caught up on some of the big things, and then just leave the last hour and 15 minutes or so open for questions. And when I talk about questions, I really mean it. You can ask whatever you want to ask. It doesn't have to be on topic. We had some folks last evening in Choctaw that said, I'm sorry to change the topic button. I thought, you don't have to worry about that. Your questions may be different than the other people that are around you and before you. We have so many people that have been coming to our town hall meetings several months ago. Excuse me. We had so many people that a couple of months ago when we did the last round of town hall meetings, we did about 15 or so in I think January, February, March, I guess. We had some people coming during that time. We thought, well, we're going to try a different system because people were having their hand up for a long time and have to wait and call on people. So we've got the cards that you were given. Can I borrow yours? Sure. Okay, thank you. We have this card that you were given. We'd ask everybody to be able to fill it out so we just know who all is here. But if you have a question specifically, you don't have to have a question, but if you have a question specifically, just write that question on the back. And then in a minute, we're going to have everybody just kind of pass it to the ends, and then we're going to take all those up when I finish speaking. So if you come up with a question while I'm talking and you want to be able to write down, you can do that. And then we're just going to randomly draw them. No, we're not going to screen them out. We're not going to sort them. We're just going to take them and put them in a basket and just start randomly pulling them out one at a time. That way we'll know, and that way you won't have to sit there for a long time with your hand up or something and be able to wait on being called. And we'll just try to keep it that way. If we have a lot of questions, we'll move through as quickly as we possibly can. At the end of the time, we go through all of these questions that people have turned in. If we still have time, if you have additional questions and follow-ups, we'll do that. But my goal is as many people as possible get a chance to ask their question and we get it out. Is that fair? So we'll get to that. We'll get that back. Let me also say a couple things on it. In a gathering like this, anytime we get the 5th District together, there's 750,271 of us total in the 5th District. We do not all agree. I know it may be a shock to you. We don't all think alike. I have my bride and my 2 daughters in my house and 1 dog, and when you get us together, we don't all agree. So I understand that's going to happen with us as well, and that's fine. I really do appreciate that. Now, welcome to America. We don't all think alike on that. But I do ask this, as Oklahomans, let's be civil to each other when we're asking questions and dialoguing back and forth. So that'll be the one parameter that I want to be able to ask all of us in whatever a dialogue and however we get a chance to talk things through. The other thing is, if you have a specific question that's related just to you, for instance, if you have a question about you're a veteran, you have a particular question about a veteran's benefit that's specific to you, in your case, can you hang on to that question and at the end, or even if you want to be able to catch somebody during the middle of it, catch one of our staff, and we'll try to deal with that directly with you. And so the questions that we deal with as a group kind of apply to everybody or more general statements on that. Does that make sense? Our Oklahoma City staff and Shawnee staff, we do a lot of answering specific questions for people that they raise. And so I want to introduce a couple of the folks that are around that do this stuff all the time. Randy Swanson, you've already met. You saw his back first. Now you can see his lovely face on it. Randy and I travel back and forth to D.C. We'll go back and forth. He's here more than he's there on it, but we're doing both and on it. I have a deputy chief of staff as well that's based in Washington, D.C., and she's not often here, but she's right there. Her name is Michelle Altman, and she handles a lot of our legislative stuff and is also deputy chief there. And fantastic, very sharp lady. She's a redhead, of course, so of course she's very sharp. Okay. Mona Taylor is straight there in the back. She is our district director. She's based here. It stays here in the Oklahoma City and Shawnee area in Seminole County, coordinating all the staff that's here, but also is kind of the lead person in dealing with casework on it. And if you have questions specifically, as I mentioned before, Social Security, Veterans Benefit, Medicare, things that are specific to you to say, I've been trying to get an answer on this Social Security issue that you have personally and trying to get an answer to it for several months, I need help on it, let us jump in and we'll be able to help. That's what our office does a lot of on it. And so Mona's the one that would be the point of contact and help assign the best staff to be able to answer that question. And by the way, no, we don't ask if people call Republican, Democrat, Independent, voted for us or doesn't vote for us. It doesn't matter. We take care of everybody that calls in on that. And so that Mona Taylor's the point person on that. A couple of the folks, Emily is right here. She's one of our caseworkers as well. And she'll also be able to take care of you. And she may be one of the people assigned. And I think I saw Kristen earlier. You see Kristen? She's probably wandering around, maybe in the back over there. And she's also one of the other caseworkers. We stay very busy. With 750,000 people in our district, obviously we stay very involved in a lot of things. A couple of the people I want to be able to introduce, my bride, Cindy, just looked in to join us. There's Cindy right there. And so I want to get a chance for y'all to be able to meet. And I also want to recognize Bruce that's there in the back. That she's talking to right there. Bruce, thanks for being here. It represents Francis Tuttle, and I really appreciate you opening up the facility for us to be able to be here. This is an absolutely great room to be able to be in, and thanks for keeping the AC on well. Hey, good to see you as well. Got several folks from Francis Tuttle here, so thanks for being here. So nice and comfortable here when it's 108 outside right now. So appreciate that. Okay, anybody that I missed on that, Randy, you know that any of the rest of the staff, I'm trying to bring as many staff as you can so you get a chance to meet folks and know who you're interacting with. Okay, you hang on to that card if you've got a question on it, and then let me talk for a few moments, and I'll try to get you caught up, and then if you have a specific question, you can pass that in either now or later on it. Several things I want to be able to catch you up on. I don't know if you've heard, there was a little bit of a disagreement about the debt ceiling. Let me hear a little bit about that. Let me give you a few things with that to give you some background. It is true, 102 times the United States has raised it as a thank you, has raised the debt ceiling. And typically that has been an automatic process. There have been times there have been some tweaking and difficulty in the process as they've negotiated, but typically it's been a pretty straightforward process. The challenge that we have in front of us now is that our debt has continued to increase and has been rapidly increasing. And you'll know this from me in any of our community meetings. I try to be as nonpartisan as can be. Obviously, I have opinions on it. But let me just say, the debt has been rapidly increasing, not in the past 3 years, but in the past about 12, 15 years. And it's been this slow increase a little bit at a time as we have not been aggressively paying down our debt. We've had moments in time that we could have paid down debt and instead we did other things with it. That is coming to roost for us. Now at $14.5 trillion in debt, we have very serious issues that we need to take care of as a nation. The problem that we have is most of the time you deal with those very serious issues during a budget conversation. When the House does a budget, when the Senate does a budget, and then you do reconciliation and try to work out the appropriations process. The Senate has not done a budget now in about 860 days. That is not a Republican-Democrat thing, that's a Senate functioning thing. And it's been a challenge for a while, and just the basic functioning of how the Senate is operating. Because there is not a moment to deal with that as a Senate and as a House and the Senate trying to work on a budget, we had to find other moments to be able to aggressively deal with it. There are very few things the House and the Senate have to do. It is one of the issues that we have currently in the United States Congress. There are no deadlines. Everything is next year, next session, next month. When you deal with the Oklahoma House and Senate, we start in February, we end in May. There's a deadline. Everybody knows you're in a hurry. You've got to get things done because when you end in May, you're done. And you're not going to get a chance to pick those things up until next February. And everything has to be done in that time. When you go to the United States Congress, everything is tomorrow. Tomorrow. It's just a constant putting things off. Even so much so, and it hasn't been this always, but even the budget now has become a tomorrow thing. That's why we have continuing resolutions, which we will most likely have again coming up in September, because the House passed a budget, but the Senate still has not passed a budget again. So I know we just had that continuing resolution fight earlier in this year. We're about to have another one again, and to go through this process because we don't have a budget. Because of that process, we determined we're going to have to find a moment when the House and the Senate have to be able to work things out and to begin dealing with the debt. Now, we have very different perspectives on this. There are some in the House and the Senate that think our debt problem is not a serious issue, that we're making our payments, and we are, and that we can keep up with it. And it doesn't matter how much debt we have, it matters what our deficit total is, and it matters how much interest our payments are. The problem with that is we are keeping our interest payments artificially low. We're at about $14.5 trillion in debt right now, and we're paying about $220 billion a year in interest alone on that. $220 billion just in interest. Now, if you go back 8 years before, and our debt was closer to about $5.5 billion or trillion, we also were paying about $220 billion in interest because a lot of our debt was long-term. Now, as we've picked up more and more debt, we're short-terming more and more of that debt and trying to transfer it over. We're getting lower interest payments, but if interest ever goes up even a little bit, we're in trouble, and everyone knows it, because we will move from 220 billion a year to half a trillion a year or more fairly rapidly, depending on the interest payments. So for us, we were looking for a moment to say, when does the House and Senate, when do we have to be able to work together to get something resolved that is specific dealing with the debt and the deficit? And there are a lot of ideas that were floated around in it. We had an initial idea, and the initial idea was we want to do some short-term cuts to begin the process of lowering our spending down. Our spending in discretionary areas of the budget has gone up 25% in the last 3 years. That's pretty rapid growth, just in the discretionary. That's not in the welfare programs, that's not in the entitlements, that's not in Social Security or Medicare, that's not in any of those. It's just in the agency part of it. So for us, we're looking at it and saying that's pretty rapid growth. So we want to be able to deal with how do we start to pull some of that back. The second thing we want to look at is how do we form some sort of cap and limiting feature. If you go back to the late 80s, probably many of you remember Graham-Rudman-Hollings, that bipartisan agreement that started capping some of the spending. It did not last forever, as they never do on that. It lasted about 7 years though. And what it did is it set up the mid-90s. It started capping the growth of government. And it was instituted in the late 80s, early 90s. It capped the growth of government until by the mid-90s, we had started catching up and had balanced budgets. Now, there were other factors that also affected that balanced budget that we had in the mid-90s, but that was a major piece of it, was that cap that was instituted several years before. So we met with economists. We met with Phil Graham. We met with the Simpson Erskine Bowles group and got a chance to go through all those individuals. Met with a lot of different economists. Met with a lot of business leaders. Met with former legislators and talked about what worked and what did not work. And started trying to form a way to say, what can we do that will at least cap for a little while our spending and slow down our growth? And the third thing we're focused in on was a long-term solution. So short-term, medium-term, long-term. The long-term solution that we all came down to was a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. The Constitution has been the parent for Congress for a long time. We still have a free press, though a lot of people in politics don't like a free press, but we still have it because the United States Constitution protects it. We still have a right to bear arms. We still have a right to freedom of religion, a freedom of speech, a freedom of assembly. We have those rights because they've been constitutionally protected for centuries. Great. We're saying the one way that we know of to be able to put boundaries around Congress and to be able to force into a set of deadlines is to do a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. So very early on in this process, we said we'd like to see immediate cuts at some level, and we can negotiate what that level will be, some sort of statutory caps, and a long-term focus on a balanced budget. We initially called it short-term, medium-term, long-term solutions. It ended up being called cut, cap, and balance before it was all said and done. Now, we negotiated and talked a lot about how big we can cut, what can we really do, how large can we take this on, how significant can the spending caps. Those went all over the place, and there was an agreement that we made in the House that we really liked and felt strong about, and they cut, cap, and balance. The Senate wasn't so hip with it, and it went nowhere. As, by the way, is not new. Okay, if you talk to my 11-year-old daughter and said, "What's the Senate?" she would respond, "That's where bills go to die." Okay, and that's not even a new thing. If you went back, 2 years ago when Democrats had the House and the Senate together, that's still what was happening during that time. It's been a frustrating deal in a lot of ways. So for us, we started working through the process of trying to negotiate this. The essential thing for many of us was, what can we do that starts getting around long-term solutions? There is no single amount that we can look at and say that's enough, is a big enough cut. For instance, the budget that we passed in April in the House was a $5.8 trillion cut over 10 years. It was very serious, but we felt like it was serious to take on the issues of the day that needed to be taken on. Obviously, that also went nowhere in the Senate. This was a simpler form of it to say, what can we do? The numbers started flying all over the place. Y'all are very familiar with all the negotiations and things that happened. At the end of the day, the final product on this was still similar to what we started to, though not as strong, I can assure you of that. It did not cut as much as we'd like to cut immediately. It cut $7 billion next year in a $3.7 trillion budget. And the amazing thing is, we've had already people contacting us and saying, that is so draconian, I don't know how we're going to make it with that severe of a cut. And I think, you've got to be kidding me. So, dealing with initial cuts. What has happened, though, with the CR battle that we had earlier this year, and with that cut next year, and it is a real cut, not off the baseline, it is a real downward cut on it, that will make 3 years in a row that we will be flat to declining, actual decline in our discretionary spending. That has not happened before. After that, the statutory caps kick in, and it limits the growth of government to less than the rate of inflation for the next 10 years. Now, I've had folks say, it goes up, it's larger at the end than it is at the beginning. I'm aware. Inflation is typically around 3%, the growth of government is less than 2%, locked in for the next 10 years. So it does limit you in real dollars. We can have lots of discussions about that. That's what we could actually get through the House and the Senate. The third thing it does is it focuses on us on a balanced budget amendment, which was essential to us from the very beginning. Now, you may ask, how does that happen? Well, let me tell you, because a lot of people have missed this and a lot of the reporting. There are a couple areas of the reporting that are coming out on this, on the debt ceiling. Everyone is very interested in these super committee, select committee, super Congress, ultra non-transparent group, whatever they're going to be called today. I understand. There's all these different terms for it and a lot of skepticism that it's going to work. Let me tell you what it really is. Typically, the way a bill gets passed is the House passes a version of it, the Senate passes a version of it, and they're not the same. And so they go to a conference committee. And in that conference committee, it's a group of people from the House and the Senate that meet together, yes, behind closed doors, and work out the details to work out the differences between the two bills. And sometimes the bills are very significantly different. They work out the details of that, and then when they work out the language between that group, then they send it back to the House and the Senate for final approval. They have to vote on the exact language before it's sent on to the President to be signed. All this select committee is skipping the first step of going through the House and the Senate first. Everyone knows we need to get to $1.5 trillion in cuts. It starts with the conference committee. It's really not that different of a process. And I know people can say it is radically different. It's really not that different than the process when we just start with a different bill. We're just starting the conference committee. When it's finished, it'll still have to be voted on by the House. It'll still have to be voted on by the Senate. Now, there are folks that are very skeptical to say that this select committee is going to come up with anything that a Republican House and a Democrat Senate is going to vote on. That may be very true. If that does not work, and it's not voted on by both bodies on it, option number 2 to be able to raise the debt ceiling is to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. So for everyone who's skeptical of it, and I'm with you as well, we'll see, then the only other way that we get the full debt ceiling increase is passing a balanced budget amendment. I don't mean vote on it. It says pass it through the House and the Senate and send it on to the states. Now, the language to that balanced budget amendment has not been finalized. And I've had folks that have said, why didn't you require it that we pass it, which was originally in the cut, cap, and balance? Why didn't you require passage? And I've responded to all of them the same way I respond to my peers. Which bit of language would you want in that balanced budget amendment? Because there is no agreed upon language for what that balanced budget amendment would say exactly. In fact, in the House of Representatives, there are 10 different versions of the balanced budget amendment hanging out there. And conservatives have not done a good job of being able to agree on common language to push that through. That's us. We've got to finish getting that language done. The Constitution is not owned by Republicans, it's not owned by Democrats, it's owned by Americans. Both parties are required to be able to pass any amendment to the Constitution. Both groups are required, the House and the Senate are required. So we've already started a process to get the House and the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, meeting, talking about what that language would be. This bill requires, even if the Select Committee it miraculously passes all their recommendation through the House and the Senate, it still requires we vote on a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution between October the 1st and December 31st. So either way, we've got to work out language. But the backup on it is, if the Select Committee doesn't work, the balanced budget amendment kicks in and says, okay, we've got to pass that then. Because the third option is the one maybe you've heard a little bit about. It is an across-the-board cut. It cuts everything except for Social Security, Medicaid, and veterans. Everything else has an across-the-board cut. No one in Congress wants that. It is the same language that was used in the 1990s in the Graham-Rudman-Hollings agreement for statutory caps. that mandated that Congress get serious about their spending, or else this would kick in. Even during that time period, everyone said, we never want to do that. And so it was never brought up. They did their business on it. We have the same language at this point again, because no one wants to see those across-the-board cuts. But it also has one other piece in it. That across-the-board cut also doesn't raise the debt ceiling 1.5, it raises it 1.2. You want to know what the difference is? 1.5 will get our debt ceiling, our next debt ceiling fight, into 2013. 1.2 will land our next debt ceiling fight in September, right before the election. Nobody wants that either. So here's the deal. That backup plan is so bad because it's indiscriminate in its cutting. And it's so bad because of the timing based around the election. The president did not want that at all and doesn't want that at all. It leaves really two options. This select committee actually do its work and get it done, or pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Now, I can tell you selfishly, I hope the select committee doesn't work. Because I think long-term, ultimately, we need to have a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Now, there's some issues with the language we've got to work out. I've got a couple of things that are for me personally. There has to be some way that we have an emergency out on. And I don't mean emergency like the pay-go emergency. A couple years ago, Congress declared a pay-go emergency for the census. Okay, the census has been scheduled since 1789. Okay, that's not an emergency. Okay, I mean, if we had another Katrina, that was a massive disaster that we'd have to respond to, that has some kind of out to say we could allot additional funding for that item. If we had a declared war, we need to be able to allot additional funding for that declared item. Not just we have no more restrictions anymore, wide open again. We do need to have that out. We are the federal government, we're not a state. So there needs to be that opportunity. I would also like for us to have, because it's so bad, I'd like for us to also have a delayed entrance, let's say, of it. That once it's passed by the House and the Senate, it goes to the states and starts ratification. After ratification, I'd like to see 5 years from the point of ratification it actually goes into effect. You may say, why? Why not just immediate? I can tell you why. We are so far out of balance. It will be very difficult for us to get back to balance in a year. Now, I had folks say, why'd you raise the debt ceiling? We should just live within our means immediately. I would compare that to most folks saying, why don't you pay off your mortgage entirely September the 1st? Most people can't do that. Here's what we have. 60%, we have $3.7 trillion. It's a lot. $3.7 trillion the federal government spent last year. We had income of $2.2 trillion. $1.5 trillion difference. 60% of our federal budget is in mandatory spending. That's all of your programs that deal with welfare. That's also all your interest payments. That also deals with Social Security. That deals with Medicare. That deals with Medicaid. All those different programs. That's 60%. That is the $2.2 trillion. That's all of it. The rest of what we spend in government, all military spending, every single agency, every single federal employee that you know of, except for those in the entitlement, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest payment, except for those individuals, all of them are on borrowed money, all of them. So for us in the day to move from here to this would mean lopping off 40% of government in a day. Now, we have ongoing income coming in each day, and we have expenses going out each day. But lopping off 40% of our functioning of any business in a single day would be very difficult, especially when it's the United States government. We've got to get there, though. We cannot continue to do this. But we've got to find a way to be able to work ourselves out of this. Just like we worked into it over several years, we've got to get out of it. The frustration that I've experienced, and I've talked to a lot of people and I've experienced great frustration with this, is Congress so rarely talks about limiting spending. When we finally talk about it, everyone says, then let's settle it. The difficulty is settling it with one piece of legislation and settling it with a very divided House and Senate and a president that does not see it the same way that the House and the Senate do. So we're going to have to work through this. Let me mention one other thing, and then I want to field your questions. I know I said I was going 15, I've gone 20 already, I apologize for that. One other thing I want to be able to mention to you on it. There have been a lot of comments that say, why don't we just raise taxes and then we'll solve this? Here's our problem. In the next 10 years, our deficit is forecast to be about $1 trillion a year. The proposal the president has put on the table and increasing taxes will get us about $1 trillion over the next 10 years, and it's high. That's the oil company one, that's the corporate jet one, that's the release of the Bush tax cut one. You put all those together, you're approaching $100 billion a year. So you've got a $1 trillion solution for a $10 trillion problem. It does not get you there. So if there's a perception, if we just raise taxes, it'll solve this, I'm telling you, it will not solve this. We have bigger issues than that. And so we've got to start working through the process of how do we get into this? Or how do we get out of it? I know how we get in it. We're there. Okay? So let me do this. I'm going to go through this Q&A sheet real quick. Hopefully I gave you enough time to be able to think through your questions. If you've got questions. Randy, which way do you want to pass their stuff? Does it matter to you? Pass everything to your left. How about that? So what have you got? Those strong beliefs and ideas and attitudes. This is not unique to this time period. There have been multiple times in American history when a group has risen up with very strong, passionate beliefs on an issue, and they've been very vocal for expressing their passion. The majority of Tea Party passions, to me, now there's a lot of different issues when you get a chance to talk to folks that identify themselves as Tea Party. The majority of them all wrap around one issue is, we spend too much. That we overspend, and they just want it to stop. And the frustration is, enough is enough. We're way out of balance. The last 3 years, we've spent more than $1 trillion than we bring in. How do we make this stop? We've got to get back in balance. I don't think that's unfair. And now they may make a statement and may make it in a way, or say a statement that someone disagrees with how they say it, but the sentiment is dead on. We're way overspending what we're bringing in, and we've got to find a way to be able to wrap around it. They have been pretty careful on it. In most areas, and I know Oklahoma, how about that? That's all I know on it. In Oklahoma, Tea Party groups that identify that way have been very careful not to identify with candidates. They identify with issues. In fact, I only know of one Tea Party that's ever endorsed any one candidate. It wasn't me, okay? But they've stayed away from that, and I think that's a good thing, because as soon as groups start to identify with a candidate, then they lose the perspective of being able to argue about a key value and a key perspective regardless of where they come from. So I don't see that. I see them being frustrated and pushing. Okay, I'm sure there are progressive groups that are frustrated and pushing on the Democrat side as well. Okay, and welcome to America. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Not exactly.
Okay, good.
No, I want to know if there are any, because it seems like that they're maligned by different elements inside the GOP, and kind of sitting alone. The left doesn't care for them, and the right is a bit embarrassed of them. I think they have good ideas. I want to know if their ideas can be integrated into the GOP instead of sitting.
No, I think their ideas where they line up and they can push need to not be necessarily integrated into GOP or into Democrats. They've integrated into how we function as a government, regardless of which party takes those on. I think if they focus in on the ideas and push and say, we need to focus on spending. Now, I've heard lots of people say, we would not have focused like this on spending if it wasn't for the Tea Party. I agree. That there was a nationwide push to say, why are we spending so far out of balance? And I think that's growing. And quite frankly, I think a lot of the Tea Party folks were very frustrated during President Bush's time as well, because they saw a lot of overspending during that time period as well. And so it's not just been a reaction to the current president, though that just accelerated the process because spending went so much faster in the last 3 years. Does that make sense? Okay, invite Nancy Zorn. Where are you, Nancy? Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to call the Congressman's attention to facts in the public record.
Just bring it back to you. We'll hold it.
Nancy Zorn, all right. Showing the facts in the public record, showing that the Clean Air Act reached $50 trillion in fiscal benefits alone this August, this very month. $50 trillion.
Let's pay off the debt well.
And saves an estimated 160 premature deaths every year, many of them in children with asthma. Now, Congressman says that you care very much about the next generation, that you care about our children, and your agents say repeatedly that you have a good heart. Do you still intend to vote for House Resolution 2584 that will severely cripple the Clean Air Act?
I'll have to look at that specific bill to make sure I'm saying the same thing. Let me say this about Clean Air Act. Clean Air Act has gone far beyond what it was originally written to do. Same thing with the Clean Water Act. When it was, I understand, it has saved a lot of lives. The question is, how far does it continue to go? Can you hear me? Have I lost my microphone? Okay. The issue is, how far does it continue to go?
That's the challenge, because right now it continues to accelerate beyond what it was intended. Now we're in a case of where a group will sue and say, we think the Clean Air Act or Water Act also applies to this. It'll go through a court system, and a court system will come back and say, we agree on that. And then EPA will pick it up and say, Congress also instructed us with this according to the courts. And when you look at the law, you think, where is that again? That becomes the issue. At what point do you cap it and say, that was the intent? And that there is certain areas of obligation. Let me give you, for instance, regional haze. What is the appropriate level for regional haze? It's going to be opinion. Now, they can look at scientific evidence, and they can say, we think it's this. But one year they may say, we think it's this, and the next year they'll say, no, we think it's half that much, and that's really what it should be. Or we think it's, no, it's half again as much, and continue to be able to press it down. It dramatically changes the economy and how we function when we do that. This is a real difference of opinion, not on whether we need to have clean air and clean water. It's how far does that go? And if we can clarify that in law, I'm fine with that. If we clarify that through regulators that seem to be inconsistent with law, I'm not fine with that. And I'm not just fine with that with this president, I'm not fine with that with any president, because that is an inconsistent application of who should be creating law in the rules. I am very aware that is a difficult conversation for any of us, because you get two scientists together and they're going to have three different opinions on what we need to do on dealing with clean air, clean water, and how severe that needs to be. Because there is not common agreement of what is the end result. If we make it this, no one can really know. It is their best guess. But you don't know, if we reduce clean air particulates to this level, where do we go from here? So I am opposed to the continued expansion of that until we can get some sort of clarification and it's settled in law. Okay. Okay. All right, let me. Carol Castle. There you go. All right, let's bring a microphone to you real quick. Yes, she'll hold it for you. There you go.
I just have a question. If you support House Resolution 997, the English Language Unity Act of 2011?
I'll have to look at that. There are a bunch of those different versions. You want to talk to the specifics of that one that you may know?
Well, I just know that to make it our overall, the language of our country, which it is anyways, but...
I'll have to look at it specifically because there are a bunch of different versions of that. There's one that's called English Plus. I don't know if you're familiar with that one as well. English Plus makes English the official language, but also recognizes every native language. For instance, recognizes every tribal language that already exists well before we got here. And some of that existence, I think, is very appropriate on it. But doing a basic operation of the United States in English, I think, is very appropriate. Let me do one caveat with it. We as a federal government are very different than a state government in handling English as an official language. We receive people at the border of all languages from all tribes and people from all over the world. We need to have some federal forms in multiple languages just to be able to function with people coming from outside of our country. And so we can't have everything all in English, or we can't receive people at the border and even go through basic immigration processes with people and do the initial transfers. Should the majority of all business transactions and all federal transactions be done in English? Absolutely. It brings unity. I think Canada is a great example of what happens when you have multiple recognized languages. They're constantly trying to split apart. So I think it does provide unity, but I want to recognize the native languages, and I do need to understand the unique federal functions as well. Does that make sense? Okay, and I can look at that specific one on that. Okay, Lynn. You were writing in your lap, and so I can't read your last name on it. Lynn Hoblitzel. Thank you very much.
Read the question.
Okay. Will you vote for or against any federal grants for education? Which ones are okay or not? Okay. You want to do a follow-up on that, or you want to just take it over?
No, you can keep going.
You know what? I'm going to have to look at each one at a time on it, and let me say why on it. The majority of the federal grants for education, well, let me try. Let me give you perspective, and let me tell you why I think this. Right now, every state is dependent on the federal government for a portion of their funding. If we cut it off all at once, our states will not be able to function. I am very opposed to every one of our states being beholden to the federal government for the structure of our education. States should be. I'm sorry, say again.
Really, everything except Title I.
Right. Well, we've got basic functions on it. For instance, we have a unique relationship with sovereign tribes all over the country. So there's a unique relationship in education for that. There's a unique relationship around military cases for education. So we have some areas that are very unique for that. But the challenge becomes, how do we transition back the authority for education, the funding for education, for being back at the local level? Again, that can't be rapid. We've got to get started, though, as a focus. We have shifted over the past 40 years, saying we need to fix education in America, and the way that we're doing that is through the Department of Education. I do think some good things have been done, but I don't think education on the whole across the nation has greatly improved. You can't see it through test scores, and to suddenly see it's much better. So this grand experiment of having a central federal planning for all education, for all 50 states and all the territories, I think is not working as we'd hoped for it to work, and I'd like to be able to push that back to the states on it. It's getting
Authorization of the SEA.
We have not seen that yet, and so we'll have to see what that is. But that is in the process on it, and I'm going to have to wait to see it. They've been fairly tight, and she's asking specifically about the education authorizations and the funding and everything for it. There's some pieces I really like coming out. The committee's called Education and Workforce now. There are some pieces that I really like that they are pushing back to the states and doing exactly what I'm talking about. That's good. We got to get that process started on it, but I'm going to have to see the individual pieces, and they haven't come out yet, to see what we do with it. Holler at someone. Okay, grab another card.
Can you repeat the questions?
Sure, yeah. All right, this is Linda Scott. Where are you, Linda? There you are. Yes, ma'am. We'll bring a microphone to you. There's Mark right there.
I would like to know your concerns about the Agenda 21.
The agenda, her question the question is
About Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is a philosophy as much as it is an agenda. It's a focus on a worldwide effort to be able to, I don't even know how to be able to begin to describe it in a short time period. It's a UN initiative, and it's an actual UN initiative that they're trying to build energy for, that uses a lot of the vehicles, some of them the environmental vehicles, to be able to basically share wealth worldwide, to be able to allow the lack of private-owned property in certain areas, and to be able to transition from wealthy countries to poorer countries. Philosophically, if you look at it, you think you have some countries with great wealth, and some countries that don't have as much wealth, so let's balance it out, and we'll use the UN as the vehicle to be able to accomplish that. Now, there's a lot in that. I know there's a lot more to that, but I'm oversimplifying it. But that's the basic gist of it. It completely violates what has actually created wealth in every country. The greatest thing that has created wealth and pulled people out of poverty is freedom, is liberty, and is a capitalist structure. And I know multiple governments have multiple levels of capitalism and how much freedom they allow in their economy. It has been the greatest thing that has achieved equal rights for women. It has achieved pulling people out of poverty, feeding children. If you look at governments and functions that have achieved that, they have achieved that through economic stability, not from pulling from other countries and taking them to them. So it is upside down. I do have a lot of issues with the UN and the way they're pushing. There are not many things that I can point to in the UN and say, wow, that's really efficient, and that's doing really well, and it's to our benefit. And it's the frustration with things that we could all identify, and some people here may be big proponents of the UN, but when people like Syria are on the Human Rights Commission of the UN, you start looking at it and saying, we have issues with the UN and how we're functioning, and it's $3 billion that we pay in dues to them, plus a lot of additional to be able to do other services on us. But I would say this, from how I've experienced and seen it, there are a lot of people that have no idea what that Agenda 21 is, but philosophically they agree with it. And so it's difficult to be able to separate and say this person's not just a person that practices that philosophy, or this person actually believes in that agenda. They're still accomplishing the same thing. So, make sense? Yes. Okay, Buddy Johnson. Yes, sir.
I'm concerned that 70% of the people of the United States think one way, but only 550 or so in Congress and Senate seem to think another way. And how can we reach the point where the people are heard, their voices are heard?
Okay, fair enough. Do you have a specific issue on that one?
Balanced budget.
His question is, how do we deal with having basically 300 million Americans think one way and 535 members of the Congress, the House and the Senate, think a completely different way? I can assure you of something, you would not have something that 300 million Americans think and 535 other House and Senate members don't. I can honestly tell you, as a freshman walking in there and cold rookie, one of the things I was pleased about when I walked on the floor of the House is, and I think most of you would be just as pleased, is to see how diverse the House floor really is. If you walked on the House floor, you may not agree with me, and that's okay. You would find somebody on the House floor that thinks just like you. And that may scare you, but you would. You'd be very pleased. There's some people that I've met in the House of Representatives that I think you are here because you like being called congressman and you like doing press conferences, and you bug me. And there are other folks that you'll never learn their name, you'll never see them. They work incredibly hard, both liberals and conservatives, that are working very hard for their district, working very hard for their ideas, and they're normal as can be. There's somebody there that thinks like you. Now the frustration is not just getting somebody to think like you, it's getting the job done. That's the real frustration. I think we lose track sometimes. Our founders set up the House and the Senate to move slow. It was designed that way. It was designed, you've got to get all these House members that are designed to be rowdy because they're elected every 2 years. They're also given the greatest amount of authority in government. The House of Representatives is given the right to impeach, the right to tax, the right to do all spending. It all starts there. So the greatest amount of power in the federal government landed on the House of Representatives. But they also, that's the largest group, and they face election the fastest. So that may be a bother to me in going through the next election because I feel like I'm just getting my feet on the ground. I'm about to have to start campaigning again next year. But that's how the founders wanted it to be. The Senate's very different. Different in the way it functions, different in the way that it thinks. So it's difficult to get a bill through both and then get to the president to sign. Example of that would be, you take the last Congress, when Democrats had the House and the Senate, the House had over 10,000 bills dropped, where they were actually filed, 10,000 bills filed. Only 4 credit, and we try to doctor the economy based on all these different credits and exceptions on that. That is not how you run a free market enterprise. Okay, that is not Adam Smith's invisible hand. That is the regulator's visible hand. Okay, so we've got to be able to pull out of that. That is the broadening the base part of this, trying to figure out how to be able to pull away from those. Dropping the rate becomes a key issue for us because we want to be competitive, but let me give you a third aspect of it. It is also moving to territorial taxation rather than global taxation. Let me explain again what I mean by that. Corporate taxes all around the world, if you have a multinational company, let's take a Mercedes-Benz in Germany. They have a factory or a sales here in the United States, they pay the tax here. They make money here off of that, their own profits. They take that money back to Germany and pay no taxes for it because they're repatriating that money. They made it here, they paid the tax here, they bring it back there, they repatriate that money. Now, they're shareholders and they open other businesses and they do other things and they obviously spend that money. They don't put it under a rock, but they're bringing it back home and it gets back into the German economy because it's based there. We don't do that in America. In America, if a company, I mean, just pick one that you may know or may work for Devon. If Devon has operations in Canada and in the United States, their operations in the United States, they can do it, pay the tax for it. Their operations in Canada, they pay the taxes for in Canada. If they make a profit, which that's kind of their plan, they're a business, and they try to bring it back to the United States, they pay tax again. They're actually punished for bringing it home. So the incentive is leave that money that they made in Canada and just invest it more there. Because we can open up another plant, we can do more drilling, we can do more things there. So their main headquarters is here, and the natural drawing is to bring the money back. We create a disincentive. They lose money bringing it home. That's not right. Now, a couple of years ago, there was a 2-year experiment with repatriating money. And they gave a gap for repatriating money. And a lot of the companies brought back money for 2 years and immediately gave it to shareholders. And a lot of people said, oh my gosh, we thought they'd do more jobs with it. And instead, they gave it to their shareholders and made them richer. Well, let me say 2 things with it. One is, it's their money. They can do with it what they want to do. They made that profit. We shouldn't, as a government, step in and say, if you're going to make money, we're going to tell you how to spend it. That's not right. Again, that's not our system. And I think part of that is, with a short window of repatriating, they immediately paid shareholders. If they had a longer window, like every other country has, they'll come back and reinvest. If we only get a short window for that, I'd take it. But I would prefer we do it the same way as every other government does it around the world, that we create the incentive, no matter where you do plants, you bring your money back, you have an incentive to bring your money back here rather than spend it over there. That, I hope we can get done. The president's on board with that as well, and that's a benefit to us. Getting through the rest of reforms on the individual tax forms, just because our tax code is 9 times longer than the Bible, it needs some simplification. But there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all fix that's going to fix everything on it. It's just not. But we do need to get major simplification, and there is broad agreement on that. Now, the details of that is the tough one to get it done. If you looked at the budget that we put out from the House in April, in that budget, it says things like, we need to eliminate loopholes in the tax system. It does some broad-based statements. Now, in the past couple of months, that's become highly charged and very partisan in those statements. We already have agreement on that, but we've got to be able to pull it out and figure out how we're going to process this. What we don't have agreement on is raising the rate. We do have agreement on broadening the base, and that's what we've got to figure out what to be able to do. That makes sense? That's coming. Ways and Means is the committee in the House that actually takes that on. They have been very tight-lipped on ideas and proposals that they're going to bring to the House on that. But it is a broad-based, very conservative group, and I anticipate they're going to bring a good proposal out. Whether we can get that done in the next 2 years, I hope we can. Okay. Jody Marsh. Yes, ma'am. Let's bring a microphone to you. Somebody have a microphone? Here comes everybody ready. Or I can sit really close and you can lean into my tie. Come on in, come through. There you go.
I'm going to repeat my question, though.
Sure you can, or you can adapt however you need to. Yes, ma'am.
Something like, what would you do to make changes in the Social Security?
To be able to stabilize it.
2024 is going to be insolvent.
Right.
What would you do now to reform it?
Okay. Let me clarify one thing on that. 2024 is the year that Medicare goes insolvent. Social Security is about 2037, actually. So we have more time on it. Social Security is one of those areas that there are multiple different proposals. Some of them are how we do the payments on it. Some of them are some of the solutions they did in the 1980s. In the 1980s, we moved, I mentioned before about in 1965, the life expectancy was 70 years old, and now it's 79. That's for Medicare. If you go back to Social Security in 1935, the average life expectancy was about 64, and Social Security kicked in at 65. It was set up to be an emergency fund, that if you outlived your working life or your own set-aside funds, that there would be something to keep you from going on the street. The challenge has become that now some have taken it on as their 401k. They're not investing in their own retirement, they're retiring early, and now they're trying to live off longer off of it. It's small. Any of those who are on Social Security, you can nod and say, it's not a huge amount, but it was not designed to be the full amount that would be required. There was an assumption that people would also be setting funds back. During that 1983 agreement, Republicans and Democrats took it and moved it from 65 to 67. That is coming. And there's already that transition that's happening. Many of you may already have your Social Security things that are coming out, and that is already in ship. I think that needs to be reevaluated again. The good thing is we're dealing with a long time period here, 2037. So again, if we do it now, you very slowly migrate some of those things out, hoping that we have continued life expectancy that continues to grow in that, as we all do. That helps us. The one exception on that is we need to have some way of processing people that do heavy, intense, hard labor all their life. If there's not some way to be able to help those, because some of those folks are not going to make it to 67 or 68 or 69. It's going to be very difficult for them to be able to make it at that current level for them. But we do need to look at some of those specific ways of handling that. We also need to be able to look at Social Security disability. And it's not kicking people off Social Security disability, it's making sure we don't have fraud in Social Security disability. It has become a place that some people are running to, and it's become a second unemployment opportunity for them. That is not what it was designed to do. And so that is an area that we need to be able to look at and be able to reform. So, does that make sense? Okay.
But for the person, like a woman on Social Security,
Right.
a lot of women back in the earlier days did not work, and they
Right. Didn't put the
they
money
got
in.
it from their husband, which I have, because I was more of a,
At home.
yeah.
All of those factors have to be in it. The best thing we have about Social Security right now is there are issues that are coming. We have enough time to be resolved. We're not in panic mode. We don't need to get to panic mode in Medicare. We need to start resolving it now. so we don't get to this
Can I
spot.
ask that question about Medicare then? What would you do to reform it?
Oh, on Medicare, let me lay you the thought, because I'm sure there's some other folks, and there may be some questions in here as well. Medicare, we made some proposals during our own Republican budget. I'm going to set this up so I don't lose track of it. And let me tell you, Ken Hartman, where's Ken? You're up next, okay. So you can get your nervousness up. We made a proposal, and it has been much maligned in dealing with Medicare. What we had made the proposal on was to take Medicare for those that are 55 years of age and older, that are near retirement and in retirement. Nothing changes for them. We have enough time now if we'll start out. But for that group, nothing changes for that group. They can stay with it. For 54 years of age and under, here's the shift that we would make. The recommendation is what happens in Medicare Part D right now, and I'm not talking about the payment part of it, I'm talking about the options part of it. Medicare Part D right now, if any of you have the prescription drug benefit, you know. In our area, I think it's 32 different plans are available for Medicare Part D. You look at the plan that best fits you. All of those plans are approved by Medicare, and they run through Medicare, and they're paid by Medicare. All of those have guaranteed coverage. None of those you can be denied coverage from. Pre-existing conditions are all assumed on it. So you're not kicked out on any of those. Those are the 32 plans that you get a chance to take a look at. That competition has driven down the cost of Medicare Part D. Now, there are other issues with payment of Medicare Part D. That section of it has driven down the cost of it. But it's guaranteed coverage. It's through a section of insurance companies, and I know, I guess that's evil to say insurance companies nowadays, but it is managed by Medicare. We're going to take that, what we have learned from Medicare Part D, and apply that to Medicare Part A and B. So multiple companies would compete for your business. You'd be guaranteed coverage. You wouldn't be kicked out. I've heard some folks say it's a voucher. It's not a voucher. It's not handing you a check and say, go find your own insurance. It would come to you and say, these are all the options for Medicare. Here are all the different options that are out there. You get a chance to select which one. Medicare pays them directly, just like it does for Medicare Part D now. Doing it, that system allows people to be able to make choices that fit their healthcare needs better. It also does this. If you have higher need, you have greater coverage. If you have lesser need on that, you have lesser coverage. We also look at what happens in Medicare Part B right now. Medicare Part B already has a means testing element that's already built into it. If you're a senior adult with a higher income, now that's not assets, it's an income. You're a senior adult that's still making a significant amount of money, you pay a higher premium than people that don't, or people that are absolutely retired and they have no income. We think that's appropriate to apply to also Medicare A and D. We're being criticized saying that some senior adults are going to pay more. Yes, they would. The senior adults that have a higher income in this plan would be asked to pay more to be able to cover that benefit for them in Medicare Part A and D as well. But in B, it's already that way already. That is the plan that's been much maligned. Now, the challenge of it is we've got to do something, and you've got to be able to push back on it. We have been pushing on the president because the president has made public statements that he wants to cut $250 billion in the next 10 years out of Medicare, $100 billion out of Medicaid. We have been pushing to try to resolve that and figure out, okay, how does that get accomplished? With a meeting with Timothy Geithner and all the freshmen, this was Republicans and Democrats together, we were going through, I know people are smiling when I say meeting with Timothy Geithner. I know. I know. He's actually, let me just tell you, you meet him and talk to him as a person, you would enjoy talking to him. Philosophically, you may not agree with him. I do not, by the way, on many issues. As a person you want to just chat with, you would chat, shake hands, go, very nice person. We don't agree, okay? And then you take it from there. But in a meeting with Timothy Geithner, we got very specific in going through how to be able to accomplish this. The plan the president has is accomplishing $250 billion in savings in Medicare using the IPAP board that is passed the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act creates a 15-member panel that has doctors, that has all these different people that are appointed by the president. That 15-member panel, they're looking for efficiencies in systems. They have the authority to be able to look at certain procedures and certain prescriptions and certain products and say that we're not going to cover that. The plan is to use that IPAP board to find $250 billion in savings, and Timothy Geithner's exact words were reducing reimbursements to doctors, hospitals, and drug companies. That is the challenge. Now, they don't have any more details than that because IPAP doesn't even exist yet. Obviously, that board, we don't know who would be on that board at this point. It hasn't come into existence, so it hasn't been appointed. But that is the plan. So I'm very aware.
The second question is each congressman and each senator has a budget for their office about $1 million a year, roughly.
Right.
And then your salary and all of those things. Why can we not find 535, half of that would be $235 million if we cut half out of your budget, out of each one. Now, I heard you say a while ago, well, that's only $240 billion. That wouldn't even start the budget. It starts.
It starts.
Every American
No, I'm
citizen
saying
here-
it doesn't solve it.
Every American in here has had to tighten their belt. I tightened mine. I don't have any more holes on the end of my belt. I'm done. Okay, I'm done. But Congress has not done a thing to take care of yourself. You haven't tightened your budget. You haven't tightened yours. When does that end?
Can I say, let me answer a couple of your questions. Those questions are very fair. Number one is Congress has started tightening the budget. We've
No,
already.
you haven't.
Yes, sir, we have, actually.
Half of your budget could be 500, instead of $1 million, we're on 500,000.
The question deals with, how does Congress start cutting their budget? That's the second part of your question on it, correct? How do we start cutting back our budget? That $1 million deals with all of our staffing, deals with all of our functioning, deals with all of our officing, every bit of equipment. The very first thing that we did when we walked in is that we started cutting budget across the board for all of the House. We don't have responsibility for cutting the Senate has to do that. I have 18 staff members that are allotted to me that we can use in all of our locations. We right now have 14. We are doing that. And I know I don't do press releases and brag about trying to cut stuff down. I am doing that. And we are doing that as a staff and trying to walk through and save money everywhere that we can. We also just passed an appropriations bill, as a legislative appropriations bill, that cuts us another. That budget of $1 million will be cut $90,000 next year again. So that is again on top of that. That is. I know. Listen. I understand the frustration.
If you're going to cut 90,000 out, look, you're taking 90 cents out of $100, and you're saying you're doing a good job.
No, that's not 90. That's not 90 cents out of $100. 90,000 out of $1 million in that illustration would be $9 out of $100.
Okay, $9.
Okay.
You're going to leave yourself with $999,991. Gee, give me that budget.
Here's the frustration, and I do understand the frustration. I do understand the frustration. The problem is, no matter what amount we set, it's not going to be enough for some people. I'm not saying that about you. I'm saying that for all of us. I kicked around with several groups of people when we started talking about dollar amounts and how big to be able to cut. When we did $5.8 trillion over 10 years, that was real cuts, not funny money, not the goofy stuff that's being passed around in Washington, because I'm on the budget committee, I can tell you we fought that to make sure it's real. We had plenty of folks say to us, 5.8 trillion is not enough. Why don't we cut 12 trillion? Love to. Here's the issue. How do we get there and actually get the job done? There is a very difficult balance point.
Send me the budget, I'll put some red lines on it. I'll put some red lines on it and send it back.
Ken, I'd be glad to do. Can you pass that to Senate?
Probably not.
That's our problem. We sent a $5.8 trillion cut to the Senate.
So the
They
next
didn't even
election,
take it up.
when the Republicans have the Senate,
We better do something.
so when you have the White House and the Senate, we're not gonna get, and I was a big, and still am a big Bush guy.
Hey, you
but he
can't
didn't
go back.
He didn't see a spending bill that couldn't be touched.
That's exactly right. We had a lot of issues there with overspending, and it's been there for a long time. It has been for a long time.
Sorry.
Well, let's hang around for a little while, and let me follow through on the rest of your questions. Okay, can we do that? And let me keep going on it. Those questions are fair. Okay. Let me dig down to the bottom here. Ann Barnholt?
I'll let you
There.
read it. You can
Okay, thank you. Have you read Warren Buffett's op-ed in the New York Times? I did, actually. Please comment on why we should not tax the rich at historically high rates. And the challenge is, what's historically high rates? And a lot of people have said the Bush rates, that were done during the Clinton administration. You could also go back to the Carter rates, or you go back to the Nixon rates, and keep going from there. The challenge of his rates is what's the right number. And I'm going to tell you, it's a guess. It's a cold guess. What amount do you raise that you actually damage the economy? There is an amount that you raise it enough that the economy slows down more. The challenge is, I've heard people say, at this rate, we're not producing jobs. Say, okay, if we raise taxes, does that cause us to produce more jobs? I have a personal belief, for me personally, and I read Warren Buffett's piece saying, I'm ultra-rich, tax me more, please. I would have a couple of comments to Warren Buffett on that. One is, Warren Buffett, you know Timothy Geithner, you hang out with him all the time, hand him a check. I have a very difficult time, me personally, I have a difficult time saying the federal government is so efficient, there's nowhere we could cut, we have to raise taxes. Historically, you go back to early 1990s, there was an agreement to cut $3 in spending and raise taxes $1. If you look at that, the actual spending, we raised taxes to $1, the $3 in spending cuts never materialized. If you go back to the early or the mid-1980s, same kind of deal was done. The spending cuts did not occur in the same way. So there are a lot of things that we've got to be able to look at. I feel like right now where we are, we've greatly accelerated spending. The best thing we can do is get a check on what we're spending. Part of the reason we have such a low amount of income coming in is because of the very bad economy.
That's right.
We have
Where are the
15%.
jobs?
We have 15% income revenue coming in of GDP right now, and we have 25% of GDP in spending. That's a big issue. Historically, our revenue is about 18.5%. So I'm having a tough time going to other people and saying, let's tax you more to be able to compensate for this because of efficiency. Until we deal with efficiency, I would reverse the whole system. That we've got to do spending cuts first this time, not do tax increases first and spending cuts later. I understand that's a difference of opinion whether if we increase taxes right now, that helps the economy even more. I disagree that would help the economy even more. But that's an honest difference of opinion. I understand.
If they don't want to pay, if they want to pay more taxes, just don't take deductions.
Hang on, let me keep going, because we're almost out of time, because I want to be along your time by 7:30. Mary Kaufman.
Oh, that's me.
Oh, next door neighbor, how nice is that? Okay.
What happened? I'll talk.
Bring the microphone to you right there.
I had two questions. First is, I work for a corporation that is sending thousands and thousands of jobs to low-cost geographies.
Okay.
And I'm wondering if you have any creative ideas on how we can incent those employers to keep those jobs here in the U.S. instead of sending them overseas. Because I really believe that's a large part of our unemployment rate, is those jobs are so rapidly moving over. And then, I forgot what my second little question was.
All right, I will hang around. Let me show you. That is an issue. We do have a global economy. That's the reality for every country. I'm sorry, our question was about jobs going overseas, basically. That certain low-skilled tasks are going to other parts or even some high school.
Too.
Okay, are going to other with lower wages.
Yeah, it's not call center work
That
anymore.
that is the reality worldwide. That is not unique to the United States. That's the reality worldwide. We have a global economy at this point, and we are going to compete for that. The challenge for us is twofold. One, I go back to how we handle corporate taxes, that we punish people for having and repatriating money back here and also reinvesting here. The other one is some of our regulations and our work requirements, while we are very proud of them because it protects the worker, does drive up the cost of every worker. Other countries don't do that. Now we have two options here. I don't want to reduce how we're protecting workers in that, but we do have to be able to find ways to be able to make our system more efficient. There's two emphases on it. One is the carrot and one is the stick. We've been trying the stick for a while. And if you take jobs overseas, we're going to punish you in every way we possibly can. I don't think that works. I think that just incentivizes them to push even more out of the country. We need to have ways that we look at it and evaluate regulatory environment. And when I mean regulatory environment, let me give you an example. People that have manufacturing here, one of the recent fears that comes in is an OSHA inspection. An OSHA inspection comes in, there has been some changes in how we handle inspections lately. Several of the different companies, Medicare is doing this, several other groups are doing this, where they'll hire outside private companies to be your inspector. That private company is paid a percentage of what they find to find. That means when they arrive, they are going to fine you because they get a cut of that fine. That dramatically changes the relationship between the worker or between the employer and between their own federal government. I have an issue with that. So that whole perspective changes some of the dynamics. It's not a simple deal, though, but this is a global economy.
Yeah, and,
we're not the only one dealing with
yeah,
it.
and just, one final statement is that the manufacturing and the call center jobs are long gone. They've been gone for years, but now we're starting to see the highly skilled jobs, the engineers.
I would disagree only on this way. Oklahoma City has a bunch of call centers. So call center jobs are all overseas. We have a lot of great call centers here. Dell's a great example of that.
There's
multiple
a lot
other
of
places. There are a lot of them that move around, but we have a lot of them here, and we have a lot of manufacturing here. We just need to be able to get back to business on it. So,
We gotta get that
but yeah, I'm glad to have more. John Carter. How am I getting all in the same row? I'm consistent with it.
Colburn about 2 or 3 months ago got the subsidy on the ethanol thing.
Yes.
Through the Senate. Went to the House, and I haven't heard nothing else about.
Yeah,
There's about 5 or 6 billion subsidy that goes to
6.
ethanol. Yeah, what happened to that?
His question was, there's $6 billion Dr. Coburn got through the Senate, where is it in the House? I wish Dr. Coburn had got that through the Senate.
Well, he started it, and
He
then
started
it
it.
went through. Yeah.
He started, it did not pass the Senate.
It
had-
never passed the Senate?
It has not passed the Senate. There has been a lot of conversation on it to be able to move it. It's got to be able to move fully. Now, there are a couple things with it. The ethanol subsidy is running out at the end of this year. That piece specifically is killing it early. It is running out. We need to find a way to make sure that it stays dead. Now, you may have different perspectives on ethanol. Right now, the blender tax, or the blender credit is specific on that. We do 45 cents a gallon of subsidy on every gallon of ethanol for that blender tax credit. That is considered a tax increase by some. This is how goofy things are in Washington, D.C. and how we track it. If you cut off a $6 billion tax credit subsidy, that is considered raising taxes to some people. Most people that we would look at and go, that's not raising taxes, that's killing a subsidy. I would agree on that. But some people are going to push back and say, but that's raising taxes because you took away that tax credit, so that does increase taxes on that. I would just disagree with that entirely. We need to be able to allow ethanol to be able to rise and fall on its own. Ethanol has been around a long time. It is not a new fuel. It's not experimental. There are plenty of manufacturing around. It has got to be able to rise and fall on its own. And it is very unique for us in our alternative fuels that it's both required to be there. We heavily subsidize it at every level of production. There are serious issues with the efficiency of ethanol, and when you start looking at environmental issues on it, the amount of water that it takes to produce ethanol is dramatic. So we're swapping air for water in the functioning of ethanol, and so we've got some issues with that as well.
So you think that the subsidy will end at the end of the year then, or?
I do think that's going to end.
Okay.
I do. Okay, I'm going to try to make sure I'm
See, there's $9 billion we got right there.
That's only 6, but we'll keep going.
6 billion, 6
If we're at an auction, I'll take 12. Got 5. Guy Peters, where's Guy? Guy Peters, there you are. Finally, I got off the same row. So, not that there's anything wrong with that row, but yes, sir.
I'm a current product of Oklahoma's unemployment.
That stinks.
After
They're bringing occupancy right there.
current product of Oklahoma's unemployment. Been looking for a job for the past 4 years, but what I'm coming to find out is that the living wage for employment these days really sucks. And after 8 years of a prosperous last company, I was able to afford my own home, afford my own life, and right now I'm asking for a home mortgage remodification. And you know, it's tough. What are we going to do to support a living wage in Oklahoma? We may boast about our Oklahoma unemployment, but it's shadowed by the living wage that really sucks in Oklahoma.
What industry are you in as far as specialization or background?
Call center sales.
Okay, there you go. I would say this to you as well, and by the way, if there's any employers that are here that are looking, there's one looking the other direction on it. And so, Guy. Trying to figure out how to give you a real answer to this, because that's not a simple, I mean, you know, that's not a simple question. One of the hardest things that I think we've become as a culture is looking towards Washington, D.C. to be able to solve every single issue. Because the more you look at Washington, D.C. to solve the problems, the more disappointed you're going to be, I promise. Because we can't solve everything on that. This is a worldwide downturn in the economy. What we're experiencing in Oklahoma is nothing compared to what's happening in Detroit, or nothing of what's happening currently in Italy, or Greece, or Portugal, or Spain, or multiple other countries. But it doesn't change the reality for you and what's going on. I understand that. Can we talk later? Sure. And let's get a chance to visit on some specifics, because I don't want to just give you a flippant answer. And let's get a chance to visit on that. Because in Oklahoma City, we have, at the highest area, we've had about 5.7 unemployment. Most of the rest of the country would love to be Oklahoma City and our unemployment. We have a very diverse economy that's sustaining a lot of that. But it doesn't matter if you're still the one unemployed.
Of those that are employed, the living wage, I mean, you know, what do you consider living wage in Oklahoma, you know? I mean, you know.
That depends on what your needs are, yeah.
All the jobs that I have found out that I've been trying to get and everything want to pay me below $11 an hour and give me no insurance for 6 months. I want to live.
Right.
I want to live prosperously.
I understand.
I want to dreams.
I do understand. GK, I just drew your card. Exactly where you are. I've already answered it? Okay. Yeah. Let me snag 2 more. How about that? I'll try to make them actually faster this time. Apparently chose. Wallace Johnson. Okay, got it. How about keep up the good work we're praying for you? I like that part. What is the total amount of annual foreign aid? Hey, Michelle, let me see, Michelle, do you remember the total amount of annual foreign aid that we're doing right now? I don't want to give you an off the cuff. We're going to try to give you a real answer and stuff back and forth. I've got a number in my head. I don't know if it's close.
Don't know what it is.
Okay, here's what I want to do. Can you catch me as soon as we're done, and we'll get that number to you, and we'll send it to you. We'll call you, or we'll email it to you, or however you want to be able to get it. Our foreign aid dollars are not as high as you think. The problem is the foreign aid dollars is not an easy number. You've got State Department, you've got multiple different levels of defense that also do foreign aid on it. You've got all the stuff that happens through the UN. So it's not a single budget item. It's kind of spread out in multiple areas. We want to try to get you a good number and be able to give it to you. Is that fair enough? Okay, then let me take one more from you.
What's your ballpark?
Yeah, that was my other question.
Oh. Emily Allen. Emily's still here? Very good. You know what? Why don't you be Emily? Emily just deferred. I haven't done this side for a while, so.
I want to thank you for the job that you're doing in Washington. And I have seen coverage of you on Fox News, which is about the only thing that I watch. And I have seen personal coverage of you 2 different times, as well as I saw another congressman, and I do not remember who it was, spoke of you so highly. He said he's one of the hardest working, most dedicated congressmen I have ever seen in Washington. And I want to know, that is it possible that I really heard him then say he actually spends the night in his office? Thank you for what you are doing for us.
That's very sweet of you. There are people that are actually don't like that part of it.
That's right.
There are about 50 people, both Republicans and Democrats, that actually live in their office in the House of Representatives. I pay for my own membership in a gym to be able to walk down. It's about 3 blocks away underground. I can get there, so it's not like I'm mooching off shower facilities. I'm a semi-workaholic anyway, and so I typically work till about midnight or 1. And then I go to sleep and get up, go get a shower, work out, and come back and get started again. I'm not a wealthy individual. I can't afford to be able to have 2 places. We'll try to save up at some point to be able to get out of that. It'll take us a while to be able to do that. But that's the reality of where we are. I don't talk about it much because I really don't think it's that big of a deal on it. Yeah. That's okay. No, that doesn't bother me on that one, but I don't get to keep my dog there. But we have focused in on our family. My family lives here, and so that to me is able to commute. I typically fly out on a Monday morning or Sunday night, and we'll fly back late on Friday night, and we'll get the weekend to reload. We have 1 week a month that we're in town for a district work week because we also have work that happens here, and then we have August. Which is called an August recess. It makes it sound like we're in the playground all of August. But it's a long-standing tradition. For a long time, they couldn't travel as much as they do now, and they would go home during August and get a chance to interact with people in a block of time. It's also a typical time to be able to take overseas times or CODEL experiences, to see troops, to get a chance to interact with foreign issues, to be able to do that during that time period. So that's what typically the August is. I know there's been a lot of controversy about why don't you go back and get back to work in August. The economy's bad. A couple of things with that. One of them is that I don't think we'd solve any more right now than we would in September. There is a benefit to getting cooler heads, and quite frankly, there's a benefit to getting back to your district and being face-to-face with as many people as you can of your own district, and so they can look at you and agree or disagree right to your face. I think that's beneficial. I think it keeps you in check. And so let me do this. I'm going to hang around for a little while. My staff is around, all around here. And so if you have specific questions and issues that you'd like to be able to raise, we're glad to do that. If you have specific things, as I mentioned before, that's casework related, that deals with something specific that's unique to you, please catch some of our staff. We want to be able to help on that. We help navigate the federal bureaucracy to people and trying to help people get through the system to actually get the answer they're looking for. As you have questions, we'll try to put it on our website. The card that you put in, if you put an email address on it, we'll add you to our email list. If you don't want to be added to that list, just reply back to us and say, take off our name. I don't know how you got my email address. Okay, whatever. Okay, but if you want to make sure you get updates every time we do a community forum, fill out that card and make sure we have your email address, and we will email you when that comes out. Okay, is that helpful? I hope this is helpful tonight. We're doing another one of these in Shawnee coming up, and we're in a bunch of different places. Thanks for being here.